Welcome to Evolved Radio, where we explore the evolution of business and technology. On the podcast today, we're hitting a topic that is very close to my heart, virtual reality. This is a space that I've been involved in for a long time. In fact, one of my first jobs was actually working for a company called Virtuality out of the UK that built entertainment systems around a virtual reality technology. My first headset I purchased in 1995 and have been a VR junkie in and out for years and years. Today I'm joined on the podcast by Robert Merki. Robert is the Director of Product for CognitiveVR. CognitiveVR sees tremendous growth in the virtual reality space and offers a great platform for using analytics within a virtual world. Their software helps virtual experience builders to better understand how users are interacting with their environments. Robert and I talk about the current golden age of VR and the differences in the market for virtual reality versus augmented reality. We also explore some of the use cases for analytics. Hope you enjoy it. Let's get started. And welcome, Rob. Thanks for joining us this morning.
Yeah, thanks a lot. I'm really excited to be on here.
This is going to be an interesting conversation. I've talked a lot about VR in the past. I think when I met your CEO, I kind of gave him a bit of my history as well, that I've been in VR basically from the beginning. I used to have a Frenzel optic display and had a very early on headset back in the 90s. So this is a space that I find particularly exciting, and would love to kind of get your insights on the evolution of the market. And for those that have followed VR for a while, VR is not a new industry. I mean, it's been around for 20 plus years, even more if you really want to look back at it. So I find it really interesting that it's finally coming to the forefront in some type of very real, both consumer and commercial application.
Yeah, I think it's just super interesting how we finally got to a point where we have this consumer grade, semi-affordable VR headsets that are out publicly, and there's developers building cool things for them, and there's very low barriers to entry outside of initial cost. I think, over the past 20 years, I think it's amazing you had a headset so long ago. But I think the most interesting part is just the fact that how mobile technology and the smartphone has kind of allowed us to have those very, very high resolution but small screens that we can just shove into a headset. Use the same type of gyroscopes and other sensor equipment, and then strap that to your head, and it's actually a really compelling VR experience. I think everyone in VR really has to give big, great thanks to the mobile industry for pushing that technology to where it is today.
Yeah, that's right. One of the things I certainly wanted to touch on is why VR has really caught fire recently. If the technology's been around for so long, the cost isn't dramatically different, and obviously the technology has changed. Do you feel like the Google Cardboard trick really kind of launched things out, or were the seeds generally being planted before that? What was sort of the accelerator moment in your mind?
Yeah, I think a lot of credit has to go to Palmer Luckey and what he did with Oculus. Regardless of where you stand right now with what you think of the Facebook acquisition, or what's happened sort of with their shipping delays or whatnot. I think Palmer Luckey just kind of had this dream to build VR, and I don't really think he cared where the technology was. And it just happened that sort of graphics cards were there where we could give a compelling high frame rate 3D environment in a headset, and he got really lucky in timing, and sort of the industry followed his vision. I think VR before was just, we didn't have the graphics technology to give a compelling enough view into VR that felt natural and felt good and kind of soothed the lizard brain, part of our head where we truly feel like we are in a virtual environment. I think that's the big sort of bridge that we've got. I don't know if Cardboard did a lot. I think Cardboard is a great way to get started into VR, but I think everyone I've spoken to has tried VR, didn't really get it until they strapped on an Oculus or a Vive or a Gear and sort of had that sort of premium VR experience.
Right. I guess one of the other differences is the virtual reality versus the mixed reality and augmented reality. Where do you see kind of the differences in application between VR and AR?
I think VR and AR are kind of brother and sister or close cousins or whatever you want to call it. I think VR will eventually sort of be the video game console, the Xbox of the two, and then AR will be the smartphone, right? Where you're going to go home and want to have this really, really high quality, high definition VR experience where you're playing a game or you're watching some sort of VR movie in super high resolution with, a dedicated box piece, whether that's a PC or some sort of console. And that'll be sort of, that lives in your home. I think day to day, at least in the future, we will have, I think the smartphone will be completely replaced with AR, right? I think if you think of Google Glass, it wasn't a great product, but it really shows what will be in the next, 10 or 15 years, where we have these headsets that just augment our lives, and that's how we communicate, and we don't need these, awkward black rectangles in our pockets anymore.
Yeah, the pivot point that I'm waiting for in that is the contact lens for the heads-up display.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, I totally agree with that.
Yeah. Cool. So CognitiveVR, the company that you work with, is focused a lot on analytics. And it's interesting, when I first heard this idea, I didn't quite get it at first. And then the more I thought about it, it really started to resonate with me that this is going to be an incredibly important portion of both VR and AR. Do you want to explain a bit about the analytics portion and how your company feels that plays a role in the development of this technology field?
Yeah, absolutely. I think anyone who's built a website or built a mobile app has always wondered how are my users using my app or my website. The easiest remedy is to throw in Google Analytics on desktop, or if you're on mobile, something like Flurry or Mixpanel. And if people are using your product in a way that isn't optimal and isn't what your vision was, or it's not helping them, or they miss something, you need to know that information so you can make your product better, right? Any app that you have on your smartphone right now, I guarantee, has an analytics package in it. And that's what we're looking at in VR. I think the other side of the coin is a lot of people ask us, well, isn't Google Analytics just going to launch for VR and you're crushed? And I think the answer to that is, when you look at the transformation from desktop to mobile, there was a lot of differences in the user interface, in the user experience, in the types of things you needed to track. There was just a fundamental shift in how you needed to analyze things. I think the same thing is going to happen with VR, where if you look at mobile and VR are very, very, very different. Mobile is a black rectangle that you tap on with your finger. VR is all around you. So you're going to need to know, just like in mobile where you need to know how people are using your product, you need to know in VR how people are experiencing your narrative, your game, your marketing tool, your ad. So, not only is there a fundamental transformation in how people use VR as opposed to mobile or desktop, there's a greater need in needing to know how people are using it. And that's because in VR, there's an exponentially higher amount of interactions that can happen, right? It's not in front of you. It's not on your desk. It's not in your hand. It's all around you. And people are finding, especially a lot of our customers are finding, that they build something and people don't really notice because you can't direct people in VR. You can put signs up, but you can't move the camera. You can't, force an overlay on their screen because that makes people sick. So a lot of people are having this fundamental user interface issue where they build something and then people don't use it properly. And it's a fundamental user experience and user interface problem above everything else.
Yeah, one of the applications that kind of occurred to me and kind of triggered my aha moment in this is that if you have an immersive world, potentially you could have advertising within that world. And you obviously want to know if you're placing some type of in-game ad or a billboard in a virtual world or something. You want to see how many eyes draw towards that, and it's incredibly important that you recognize, is it placed correctly? Is it within a field of view that people notice it? How long do they spend looking at it? So
yeah, that's right.
Sort of those people may be familiar with heat mapping, on websites, and you see kind of where people drag their mouse to, what they click on, and you guys are working on sort of the equivalent of where do the eyes go within a virtual world. Is that right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. Right now, there isn't eye tracking in VR. There are some headset prototypes that do it. The commercial sort of consumer-ready ones don't do it yet. So right now we're tracking a focal point, which is good enough. It's not perfect, but it's good enough. But yeah, you're precisely right. If you have an advertisement or a billboard in your video, maybe it's a free-to-play video game, and you have a Coca-Cola billboard somewhere, right? Coca-Cola is going to want to know the ROI. Did people really look at that, or did they kind of sort of look at it but not really? On mobile and desktop, it's so easy to say, how many people viewed your ad. Well, just because they scrolled past it or even hovered their mouse over it, did they really look at it? I don't know if they did, but in VR you can tell with the certainty that actually, yes, they did look at your ad or your billboard. Or maybe you're in a game and you just want to tell part of a story, and that's relevant somewhere in your level, and you won't want to know if people got your story.
Yeah, that's another portion that I was thinking of is, you're building these experiences and you kind of have to assume that people figure their way around. But, the importance of having analytics as an experience provider in my mind would be you're trying to build a narrative. You assume that people might go to, spot X and figure out that, there's some book on a shelf that they need to pick up. And if you do some testing and find that no one notices the book and continues to just kind of sweep past it without focusing, then you probably have a narrative problem. You need to sort of figure out, do you make the book flash in some way to draw attention? And it can really kind of help to form the experience better if you understand how people are interacting with it, right?
Yeah, that's precisely right. That's what we found a lot with our customers is they don't really know. They assume people are doing things, and they don't know. On desktop, or you can just imagine a video game on a PC or a console where if something happens, then you can just launch a cutscene where there's basically a mini movie that plays, and you can pause the game, but you have to look at something. In VR, everyone knows if you change your user's camera orientation on them, you immediately get sick. It's just the worst. It's the most uncomfortable feeling ever. And like you said, right, you can't do that in VR anymore. So you need to, is it flashing the book? Is it, maybe 5 steps before that? Do you need to make it more obvious some other way? So in VR, analytics is fundamentally solving sort of a user experience or user story issue as opposed to a big data or a, traditional analytics issue.
So some of the different technologies, you've touched on, the Vive and the Oculus, and some of the other ones, like Magic Leap gets a ton of attention, maybe in part because of the mystery revolving around it. And one of the ones that I see that really kind of has a commercial application traction is HoloLens, and I feel like they're making good strides to provide commercial applications. You want to give me some of your thoughts on sort of the different technologies and what you're seeing in the industry as far as attachment?
Yeah, HoloLens, I think, and a couple others like Meta 2, or I think they announced Meta 3 now, Magic Leap. I think they're doing amazing things. I think that's absolutely not just the future of enterprise, but the future of, like we said, the contact lens will eventually be HoloLens number 4 or whatever. And the problems they're solving are extremely important, right? They've been strapping HoloLenses to people doing extremely dangerous work, right? And then they can see that some sort of danger is occurring overlaid onto their world, and that's extremely powerful, right? There was a demo at the Augmented World Expo the other day where this company named Daiquiri was showing a how there's some danger and extreme electrical issues with a system, and they put the helmet on, and the worker could see right away, overlaid on top, where which sensors were beeping, which sensors detected extreme heat. So you're basically saving lives by allowing humans to augment their world with very relevant information. Or if you're an Amazon, I know Amazon was thinking about doing something with HoloLens where you overlay product information on boxes in the warehouse. Right away you increase efficiency tremendously. So I think HoloLens, Meta, Magic Leap, Daiquiri, extremely, extremely compelling and important work with AR.
That's a really cool one. I like the Amazon example because they have to go to all these bins and there's huge towers and rows full of product. And if they grab the wrong one and ship it out, everyone's seen these stuff on Reddit where people get these random stuff shipped to them, not even close to what they ordered.
Yeah, that's right.
Before they even get to the bin that they're supposed to grab, they see an overlay and they can just kind of reach into it, knowing that they're grabbing the right product. That's a great example. Just sort of simple efficiency in an overlay in their sort of their average world. I guess one of the parts that people may be a bit resistant to this, and I think as with everything, you just kind of need to get on the train because this stuff is coming. Do you think people will feel that, especially the augmented portion, the virtual reality, you're making a choice to sort of involve yourself and get into some space or a virtual world, but the augmented portion, people may see it as a bit of a distraction or an interference with their day-to-day life. If do you think there'll be some resistance to that? Have people talked about that in the market?
Yeah, definitely. That's a very good point. There's a video on the internet floating around that I can't remember the true name, but I think it was nicknamed the Augmented Reality Hellscape. And it was put together by an artist, and it's sort of just the worst possible, ads everywhere. You got a point for going on the bus, and then it's this grocery store where every product is enhanced automatically, and then the headset turns off and you see this really bland, boring world. And I think that sort of super distractive, almost annoying world of augmented reality is going to get rejected by people. I think augmented reality, just like your smartphone, just like your computer, is meant to help you. And I think the second it becomes annoying and distracting, you'll turn the app off or whatever it's called in AR. I think, fundamentally augmented reality by definition is enhancing your reality. It's not meant to distract you. I think, the people that make the best user experiences, the most minimal user experiences, yet are very helpful, will be the ones that come out the winners in AR. And I think, that's just kind of the way that smartphones work too, right? When Apple releases a very sleek, clean, minimal design that's sort of meant to get out of your way, that becomes popular. I think the same thing's going to happen with AR.
Yeah, it's an interesting point. The market will kind of decide. The way I would imagine this is it would almost have to function like plugins. Like you can choose to have those augmentations, and if you want to have your product dancing on the shelf when you walk into the store, that's up to you. But I agree, if it's ever present and it's something that's forced upon you, people will either remove it or choose not to use it. So the market will kind of determine the level of interference that it plays, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right.
I guess some of the other examples, some interesting pieces, especially around the VR space, that I find fascinating is experience almost the new version of the arcade. Like in Utah, they have the company The Void, and they're kind of taking virtual reality to a really extreme level where they're augmenting virtual reality experiences in a physical world. And they set up, basically a space that is customized around a specific experience, and you kind of run through the halls of, an abandoned spaceship with monsters and things like that. Or the new one that I saw, they have a Ghostbusters experience, and there's a physical world. So when you kind of lean out around a wall, you're actually against a wall, And they even have things like if you walk outside into a particular environment, there's misters, so it feels like it's raining. And this whole idea of these advanced experiences where VR plays an immersive role within sort of an immersive physical world, I think is absolutely amazing. I think it's really kind of the true evolution of the entertainment space, where movies become experiences, and there'll probably still be a space for passive experience of a storyline, but that active engagement in a storyline, I think, will really start to capture people's imagination.
Yeah, absolutely. I think what the Void is doing is I think there's people have jokingly kind of dubbed it the fourth dimensional virtual reality. I think those will be extremely impressive and amazing experiences, but I think they'll kind of stay in the realm of theme park or roller coaster, or arcade level. I don't think. I think that the fundamental transformative experiences will be ones you can take home. And I think eventually the technology that the Void is using will somehow make its way to your home as well, where you'll sort of have this like responsive designed VR experience where it interacts with your home in a way. But in terms of sort of the movie experience and being able to really connect at that intimate level with your experience and your, whether it's a movie or game, I think that's a very good point. Finally, in VR, it's more than just watching a black box in front of you. That's a normal movie, and we're very used to that. And we can, if it's a very compelling movie, you can get very attached to what's happening. But in reality, you're just looking at a 2D screen in front of you. And finally, we're able to have this all around you. And I think the emotional impact of certain experiences will be tremendously higher. This is why a lot of people are talking about VR as sort of the empathy machine or the empathizer, where maybe you plant a VR camera in a crisis, and it's no longer just a headline on your phone. It's something you can explore and be intimate with, and we can finally feel empathy for events that are happening very far away. So that kind of brings me to the point of, is VR going to be an isolation machine, or is it going to be something that we hide in our closet or in our room and play VR and we're alone? I don't think it will be. I think it will be something that connects everyone even closer.
Yeah, I agree. I think there'll always be that subset of people that are looking for some other place to attach to and disappear in. It's no different than the current concern around internet addiction, and there'll probably be people that struggle with the difference between reality and virtual reality. But I think that the fears of that being this black hole that kind of sucks in humanity and we all turn inward, I think it's overblown. I think people will still have the necessity to be able to have human interaction at a sort of a more advanced level, and that this is more a function of enhancing the ability to experience things with each other. And I think that's the part that I find really interesting about sort of the modern VR market, is that it's collective experience, multiplayer games, multi-person experiences, versus just sort of an immersive world where you disappear and interact with computers. And I think that was sort of the aha moment for me as well when Facebook acquired the Oculus technology. It didn't make sense to me at first until I sort of realized that the advancement of that social space and kind of that the real life 2.0, being able to interact with your friends in other ways, it doesn't detract from the physical experience, but just sort of gives you a different venue to participate in something that maybe has a little more magic to it. So I agree.
Yeah, I think just to add on to that too, I don't know a single person who, like, I'm a huge gamer. I don't know a single person, even in traditional video games, who goes home and only plays single player, alone kind of. There are those really compelling experiences, but I think everyone wants to just have fun with their friends, and I think VR allows us to the next level.
Yeah, definitely. Cool. What are some of the commercial applications? Obviously, this is something you've spent some time around, toured the industry, and the commercial portion of this will be potentially a greater market than even the consumer space. And what are some of the really cool examples that you've seen around the commercial applications for VR?
Yeah, so there is currently an arms race, and I don't say that lightly. There is an arms race to build real estate, sort of, look at your home, your future home in VR, and real estate agents sort of give you a Google Cardboard or a Galaxy Gear, and they let you see some home without actually having to go there. There's an absolute arm race in building the platform that does that. So that's a very obvious one where you just strap on a headset and you're in a future home that you might want to buy, or maybe it's a home that doesn't exist yet, right? It's a pre-built condo, or sorry, you pre-buy the condo before it's built, and you can look at it in virtual reality, and you can just make a way better decision on, is this a home you'd like? That's definitely a very strong use case that I've seen a lot of. I think training is going to be the absolute, just best use case for VR. And the simple reason for that is, you can train people and then just click the reset button. You don't have to go back and, land the helicopter and hope you didn't crash and then do a check. You just click the reset button and you're in the air again. You can try that maneuver. You can try that training exercise again. And, not to toot my own horn, but there's definitely a huge role in analytics in that too, right? If you have 100 people doing a training exercise and 90 of them completely miss some safety issue, you can track that right away and you'll know that there's an issue with your training program. And that'll just make a lot of people way safer and increase efficiency of, training. The Amazon warehouse example in AR, we could train people to do that right now in VR, and they'd be way more efficient and they'd spend a lot less time training.
The cool applications, some of the are kind of limited only by the imagination, as a lot of things with technology are. And I've seen a lot of the ideas around how those training get communicated and moved into an experience. So, a heavy engine mechanic can touch a certain button, or an airspace where, the engine kind of virtually explodes out and all the pieces pull back, and, you can work on the mechanics around something without having a physical product. And training, heavy mechanics for, aerospace, for mechanical production, even engineering, I see as a major space for this, so that, you're taking kind of Autotask and those 3D rendering materials to a whole nother level where, it's immersive. You can kind of walk around something and understand how it actually fits together, what are the issues that you're going to have to consider, and moving that into a virtual space as a whole new degree of application versus just being able to view it on a 2D screen before. The intermediary, I guess, was 3D printing, which allowed a little more application for this in understanding a rendering in real time, but being able to have it in high definition, high fidelity space that you can explore. It really kind of adds a certain element to how that is going to be applied to training and understanding of mechanics and building, I guess, in the future. Yeah,
that's right. I think one last really compelling use case I saw was there's a company called EnvelopVR. They're out of Seattle, and they're building sort of a desktop environment for VR, and they have an app within there that connects to Maya, which is, as many people know, is the really popular 3D modeling and animation program. And you can work in Maya in VR on their desktop environment, and then it automatically outputs. You just look to the right of you, and you can see your 3D model as you're editing it change in real time. So, just the work that you can do and the being more intimate with what you're doing and having a better look at things is going to be, an insane production and efficiency boost for a lot of people.
Yeah, really cool. Now, because the technology is so advanced, you can render that stuff in real time, so people are kind of immersed in the world that they're actively building. That's a really cool idea. The other portion of this is we're just kind of getting to the tipping point where this stuff really starts to accelerate quickly. What do you predict in we'll say the next 2 to 5 years? How do you think the industry is going to evolve?
I think it's hard to make predictions on specific things, but I do know, I'm certain of that there will be so many VR and eventually AR, but for now VR, experiences and products and apps and tools that we just can't even think of right now. I think a lot of people are trying to build desktop or mobile era apps or games and then convert them to VR. And I think those are important because we're learning what works and what doesn't work. But I think there's going to be a whole new class of productivity tools and social networking tools that just are different in VR. And they're going to be, I don't know what they're going to be, right? It's like when Steve Jobs announced iPhone, we couldn't imagine Snapchat. Like that would just seem dumb. Like it wouldn't make sense at all. But now that we have Snapchat, it's like, oh, okay, this actually really works on mobile, and I get it. Similarly, like user interface is going to become in just unimaginably different. There's going to be huge paradigm shifts. I think a really great example is with any smartphone. There's the most common user interface sort of element is the pull down to refresh, right? I remember when that didn't exist. Like I remember the first time I did that, I think it was on Facebook. And I just pulled down. It was so natural and so obvious, but that was a really hard design element to come up with. I remember a lot of people having a refresh button, a dedicated refresh button, and now it's just kind of like you pull to refresh. So what's going to be the pull to refresh of VR, and what's going to be the home screen of VR? I think those questions will be solved and answered. And in terms of adoption and in market and industry, I think VR is going to be in way more households than people think. I think it's going to take one Angry Birds or one killer app or one Candy Crush to make people go, wow, I want that. I really, and they might end up buying a mobile VR headset to do that. And I think mobile VR will be the industry driver, but I think eventually people are going to want those really in-depth, intimate experiences that only a Vive or an Oculus type headset can bring to you. And so I'm very, very bullish on VR.
Yeah, it's as we sort of said at the beginning, it's been a long run to get here, but the platform has certainly matured, and it's a wide open space with a ton of interest as to what this is going to mean. I think everyone realizes that the game is changing, and that this will have very real world applications and change sort of the fundamental nature of how we interact with entertainment and with training and with commercial applications, potentially advertising, all kinds of spaces that it will change. But I agree, it's a difficult space to predict, because anything that changes this quickly is you need one sort of tweak, one difference that starts to accelerate everyone in a different direction that maybe no one predicted at all. So it'll be an interesting change as to how this looks, but definitely an interesting space to keep watch of. So we'll definitely keep tabs on how you guys are working in the market, and the application of analytics being a major component to how people are understanding their experience and designing the UI and UX.
Yeah, definitely. And I think just to tack onto that as well, right when people get very comfortable with having VR, their smartphone's going to disappear and AR is going to take over, and people are going to have to learn a whole new device to their life.
Yeah, that's right. I think it's not to be understated that the phone will disappear, and it'll just become sort of it's maybe something that you still have to carry, but it's kind of like you said, it's a black box. It's not something you necessarily interact with. So the shift that implies for how people interact with their devices on a daily basis, I think will be interesting. This is something I've kind of joked with my wife that she occasionally gives me a hard time for staring at my phone, and if the kids are around, what does that mean, and how do the kids perceive that? But I always tell her that the kids will think it was silly back in the day when people had to stare at their phone in order to process that information, and it'd just be overlaid, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Yeah. Very cool. So, Robert, if you want to give us your details, if people want to understand more about Cognitive VR and what you guys are doing in the market, where can they follow you on social and other?
Yeah, absolutely. So we're CognitiveVR. Our website's cognitivevr.co.co. You can find me find us on Twitter at just at CognitiveVR. We're building an analytics platform for virtual reality. We have customers who've installed us, and we've helped them make better games and better experiences, and that's what I'm passionate about. And if I will say one thing: if you're not in VR right now and you are interested in virtual reality, there has never been a better time to get into it. It's so easy to download Unity or Unreal Engine. They're both free. Just open up a game, import a couple plugins, and you can start making your own VR experience. And I think that's an incredibly powerful thing that we're so lucky to be here right now. And we're so lucky that it's so accessible. And I think, Todd, you've been here in the VR space a long time. And I think I could say with certainty it's been the easiest to get into today than any other time in history. So yeah, I would just highly recommend, if you're not in VR, go try it out. It's super super fun and super exciting.
Yeah, definitely a growth space for anyone who codes or want to code. As you say, you can use your smartphone to get started, so the barrier to entry is really low. It's great.
Yeah.
Cool. Appreciate your time, and we'll definitely keep tabs and maybe have you back in a little while to see sort of how things are shifting, how things are changing. I'm sure it'll go quickly.
That'd be fantastic. Thank you very much, Todd.
Thanks, Rob. Take care.
Bye-bye.